Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Patrick, good to see you back. I actually was going to ask you to walk everybody through the anchor thing that you're telling us with the drag and stuff like that.
Oh, I said the first week. So the first week we were here, we were talking about, he was making the analogy for anchor, to set yourself down as a firm foundation for your family. But I was explaining the physics of how a ship's anchor actually works. It's not the anchor and the points on that heavy weight that actually holds a ship down firmly to the shore. It's actually the chain connected to the anchor. Because the way that, those chains are thousands of pounds, some of them several tons, and the length of the chain actually makes the difference because it's the friction of the chain on the ground that really holds down the ship. Because yeah, you do need that, that heavy weight at the end to kind of, lodge itself in the mud. But usually if you think about a boat if you have the rope go straight down to the floor, there's not much to really hold it on there, and it will just drag that chain around. But if you have like a mile of chain lying up on the bottom of the seafloor, it's got to drag that anchor along with a mile of chain that weighs several thousand tons. That's what's really keeping you there. So I was making an analogy for this class, and if we're gonna be anchors at the end of that chain, it's not enough to just have sharp points and weigh a ton and be rooted. We also have to increase our faith and live a daily life that gives you a greater connection to God, that ship that you're anchoring to, that link by link, day by day, we're increasing the length of chain that we have on the bottom of the seafloor. And as we continue that walk, the longer our chain gets, the better fastened to the ground we're going to be. So that's more or less what I was explaining.
Yeah, thanks.
So anchor worthless throughout the book.
Well, I think that,
That's what I heard.
yeah, that's, well, like again with the links, that's basically what we all are. We're the links. Either we're the beginning of that connection to God and being anchors for our families, or we're, several, generations down the line of other links that have been there, just something real quick, just so I do share it. My grandpa drank a lot, and he didn't go to church. And my dad to this day is actually still holds a little bit of anger about that situation. And fortunately for my dad as well, there were other people around him. He had a great grandmother and an aunt that actually were extremely faithful. His uncle on his mom's side was a preacher, Church of Christ preacher. He moved to Tennessee, and he's passed away now. But so there still was that. He still had those links there. My great grandmother and my great aunt wanted my dad to be a preacher, and he actually did go to preacher school, and that's where he met my mom. He went to Blytheville, Arkansas. I don't know exactly what they call Crowley's Ridge is what it's called over in Arkansas. And that's where he met my mom. So there was always he had links around him to help guide him, but you just, based off of everything that I'm reading, one thing that's very apparent with every book that I've ever picked up about parenting or leading your family is that the dad is a huge part of it. And we will learn as we keep going that there's really good examples of people that have done really well and been extremely good at coaching and being there for the family and doing the things that God expects us to do. And it's more successful that way than it is not doing it that way. So I'm going to start off because one of the focuses of the book is it takes us to Deuteronomy 6. So I'm going to go there. And Kenny taught us about the Shema last week. And he used a really good illustration of how powerful faith can be when he shared with us during World War II. A Jewish man goes to an orphanage, and he's there to collect up all the Jewish children to bring them back to basically for the Jews to actually raise the orphans or to take care of the orphans or to get them back to their families. And someone said that they didn't know, where the children came from. It's World War II. You know, it's chaos. They're just children. He said, I do. He said, I'll show you. And as Kenny told us, all he said was the very beginning of the Shema, Hear, O Israel. And all the children, they come out and they get on their hands and knees and they begin to pray. You know, and that got me to thinking this week, because I thought, I mean, there's several things that you hear, like when you're studying different things, and I don't know if you're the same, but they stick out and they like make a huge impact. And I mean, that was like one of those moments where it's just like, that's awesome. And I got me to thinking, we're Christians, we're raised in the Church of Christ. If that was our situation, how would anybody know that we're the Christian children, or we're the children of the Christians? Is there anything that we do that somebody could actually, here, I'll show you, and walk into a room and do something that would call out all the Christian children? You know, and I mean, the Jewish faith, I mean, it's pretty powerful, you know, and one thing that I noticed, like during the pandemic, is that they already were aware of situations that could cause them to be separated or to cause them to be isolated, and they stuck together. You know, and I mean, those things are like really cool. And the most important person in our lives, Christ, comes from there. Christ taught from that realm of spirituality, of that belief of God. And I'm going to start in Deuteronomy 6 real quick, and I'm going to read. I'm going to go ahead and just start in verse 1, so we can kind of get like the links that we're discussing in the reading as well. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you, to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children, after them, may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Okay, so we have a long line right there in just those first couple of verses, 1 through 3. Generation after generation after generation. And that's the goal, is that we're not here for today. We're not doing what we're doing for us. We're not doing it for our wives. We're not doing it for our children today. We're actually doing it for those generations to come. So it continues on. And then here's the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. So the Shema, that's verses 4 through 9, that Kenny was telling us about, that it's their morning and evening prayers. Or it's a morning and evening prayer for the Jewish faith. But that's one thing that's like, you just see all the generations that have been affected by this faith as it's continued to move along since Moses brought them out of Egypt. So one thing that I do at home, not to toot my own horn, but as I'm going through this study, I want to see, are there things that I'm doing, or is there anything that I can add? And I think that tonight you'll see kind of the benefit of that as we study it. But at home, we've been going through the Bible, and right now we're reading in Thessalonians. In 2 Thessalonians, I wrote down the verse that hit me when we were doing it the other night, because it was right in line with what we're talking about this evening. So in 1 Thessalonians 2, 11 through 12, it says, "For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory." Let that sit in for a minute, because we're talking about being anchormans for our family. Paul, a lot of times in his writings, he's referring to the people that he's writing to as children, as his dear children. Timothy is a great example, that his true child in the faith. And is being anchor men. We need to be around those people that are doing those things, those encouraging, really spurring us on to do what's right. And last week, Bob wanted to discuss some things about like some ideas of, he has a young man that he's raising in his house, and any ideas of like what can be helpful and stuff. And tonight is actually, that's what this class is about. It's about that situation where, what do you do? Because some of us might not necessarily have that anchor man that started out a long time ago, that passed down from generation to generation, that told us how to do that. There's a couple questions that the chapter asked that I'll read out to you. But the people that didn't have a dad, that didn't pass down anything, where do they start? How do they begin? And one of the best things to do is you seek advice from people who are doing it. You find good ideas. So this is chapter 3, and the title of it basically, the Plymouth Rock Coaching Clinic. So you can kind of like figure out where we're going with it, right? Paul's writing letters. He's coaching his team. He's encouraging his team. He's lifting up his team. He's not tearing down his team, okay? There's no tearing down in Paul, except that I can think of, except when you talk about the Corinthians, when there's a part of it where he gets on them pretty hard. But it's like a parent, though. Somebody called out one time about, I think it was 2 Corinthians, where he's the harshest. But basically, all the commentaries said, don't stay away from how harsh the letter is. Don't stay away from the tone. I stayed away from the tone when I taught the class because I was in the military. I grew up following rules. That makes sense. So I wanted to go with something new that I saw. And Charles Williams talked about the context instead of the tone. And the context was how sincere Paul was. And as parents, we're going to be sincere if we love our kids. If we don't love our kids, we're not sincere. We're just doing something for our own benefit, or maybe we're not doing anything at all because we really don't care. So as we keep talking about the different things that being an anchor man involves, this week we get to find out, like, what do you do basically when you don't come from that link that leads to God. Okay, so read about George S. Patton. Okay, George S. Patton. He was a legend in his own lifetime. He's one of those links about the 100 years of the ultimate warrior almost. One of his fellow officers says, "We shall never look upon his like again." He was groomed by his father for admission to the Virginia Military Institute, VMI. He was second in class, rated first in tactics, math, Latin, geology, and chemistry. They said that he was arrogant. They said he was a smart dresser. He displayed classic chivalry to ladies, making him a dashing romantic figure. He was devoutly religious, and the book said to his own standards, so I don't know exactly what that implies, but maybe he had a vision that didn't really line up with our scripture, which that's important, okay, as far as like being the anchormen of your family. He encourages men to attend chapel and rarely missed an opportunity to pray on his knees before his God. You remember chapel in the Navy?
We really didn't have it at sea. I mean, I never went to chapel. When I was in boot camp, I sought out a church.
Yeah.
They came to the base and held those that were members of Christ's body.
Right.
They were different, yeah, but yeah.
And it's kind of like they do at the hospitals too. I don't know if you'll know this, but there's like Gary go to the hospital for the Church of Christ, and there's other people that go to to hospitals and from different denominations. But I remember chapel in the Navy. I went to a funeral to one, and one thing about the chapel is that, I mean, it's the chaplains that actually come in and do the services. It's an all-inclusive service. They really stay off of different topics that would actually be divisive among the people that could be there, and they focus more on just glorifying God in the services. But so George Patton encouraged them to go to chapel. and he never missed an opportunity to pray on his knees before his God. So this month we're actually talking about prayer. So I'll try to key in on that a couple times, because prayer is something that I think sticks out in everybody that we know as far as somebody who is godly. And as far as being an anchor man, that should be just right there as an obvious observation of something that we need to do. If you don't pray, would encourage it, because it's something that will keep you close to your Father, and it's something actually that it's very beneficial to you when you're having a rough time. Or, just when you're happy. It's a good thing to do. His grandfather so basically, the guy he was a visionary, and he was determined to prepare. He was determined to be prepared for action. They said that he saw war in the clouds. And this is the grandfather of George S. Patton III, we all know from World War II. So a link that started way before the giant general that showed up in World War II, right? So he died in 1864 from wounds in the Civil War. Fearless in combat. He actually, one thing that was really cool is that he had a $10 gold piece in his pocket that actually a bullet ricocheted off of that saved his life. Okay, so that's paternal grandfather of George S. Patton III, the great war hero of World War II. So Benjamin Davis Wilson was his maternal grandfather. He oversaw, managed, and owned a ranch that became Orange County. Not a city, a county. His land holdings included the campus of UCLA, the city of Pasadena, the city of Riverside, and most of Orange County, of course. A visionary male leader. Just think of something that big, a ranch that's that huge. How many jobs that he could provide for the people in the area. And just think how hard it is to run something that big. When, just think about what you run at home, right? Talking about running a county. There was a very strong tradition of good coaching in the Patton line as far as being a soldier and also being a male leader. And George S. Patton actually was third in line. It said that his dad was pretty cool too, but there was no war that he could become famous in at the time. So, strong, balanced male leaders produce strong, balanced male leaders. Men who grow up with effective and balanced fathers do not ask what an effective family leader looks like. They have seen one in action, and intuitively they know how to coach when it is their time and place to do so. So, Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. So we have a lot of scripture that backs up that, right? To where you're passing stuff down to generation to generation. Being a parent, one thing that I didn't realize that when you grew up, that your parents kind of step aside and they're not really coaching much anymore when it comes to kids sometimes. Dale talks about how the grandparents and the children have a common enemy, which is the parents. And that's shocking to me, because I always was under the impression that the grandparents continue to teach and they're there for their kids and stuff like that, as far as some of the things go. But grandparents have had their turn, and a lot of times they like to have fun with their children, right? Get them something sweet to eat, or take them to go do the fun stuff, and leave all the trials and tribulations to the parents. Okay, so one thing the book starts talking about is the confused father. Not well coached by his dad at home when he's growing up, so there's a lot of confusion there, and basically doesn't really have a guide. And that's one thing that's really interesting to me, is the way that I believe that Scripture talks about different things that we actually come into contact with that actually are a visible or a visual aid for us, right? It tells the wives to basically respect and submit to their husbands as to the Lord. The husband is the visual aid. They get to pretend that you're basically the Lord that they're submitting to and they're respecting, and when they're actually living with you. There's things that we can do that actually make that a lot better. If we love them the way that Christ loved the church, giving ourselves up for them through the washing of the Word, guess how easy that is for them to respect and submit when we don't do those things, it's their choice. But just think how, I mean, who would want to submit and respect anybody that's not doing those things? So it's really neat to me how, just as you come through life and you meet different people, what I've really focused on, because I thought it was like really helpful for my family, is that there's the light and then there's the dark. So I tell my children when they leave the house, when they go do different things, I say, stay in the light. And I mean it, of course, physically, because bad things happen when you go in the dark. I've been following a story about a guy with the last name Riley that he went missing in Nashville. He was basically at an event with his fraternity, and we all know fraternities and kind of the things that they get into. Well, he goes to a bar, gets kicked out of a bar, and he's supposed to just walk back to his hotel. That was his plan. Never made it. They're looking for him now. They found a debit card by the river, and you can only expect, you hope for the best, but it's probably not going to end well. And I think about, I'm telling my kids, stay in the light. And that's one of the reasons, physically, stay in the light. Stay where people can see you. Stay where they can hear you scream. Stay where they can actually get to you if they need to. I don't want my kids going off the way that I actually went off a lot of the times. When I was growing up, and we were like in 7th grade, it was the kids actually got to go to the movies. And they would be dropped off at the movies. Well, there was also something else that the kids did. It's called going Kroger. They actually went behind Kroger to where they could kiss the girl if they wanted to. Think about a place that's not safe, and think about a place that's probably in the dark, right? So as we grow up, we make bad decisions, and thankfully a lot of us, most of us, because most people are good, a lot of us make it through that, but there are those times where you don't. And this young man, he's just walking back to his hotel. I lived in San Diego. I've lived in Portsmouth, Virginia, where I'd go to Virginia Beach and walk around at night. And I did a lot of stuff by myself. I'd just walk. I can think that there was plenty of times I wanted to take a shortcut, and I'd take that shortcut just to get back to my car so I could get home faster. And that shortcut by myself was not a safe choice. I made it, But there's things that we do that, sometimes our choices lead to bad things. And from there, we have to pick up the pieces and start over. And we have to become that link again. And I think that it's very crucial that we actually respect the light or the people that actually have shown us the good way. And we kind of stay on track with that. So the confused father struggles with what it means to be a dad. It is easier to build a boy than to mend a man. That's a quote that was in the book. I've heard that numerous times, and I thought that was pretty good. And Bob, that goes right back to your question last week. You're asking for advice of like things with Clayton, things like that. But you think about all the stuff that you do and that you've done. I actually wanted to keep my book open at chapter 2. Just because that conversation last week that you started got me thinking about the very first part of chapter 2. And I want everybody to kind of like think about this, because if you don't have children, you may one day have children, and these are some really good ideas. But what it takes to be a dad, okay? So that's the context of what I'm about to kind of read to you. But those questions are good, like what are we doing to like, our kids get older, they get more independent, some of them make bad decisions, some of them get more rowdy. Maybe sometimes we're just hard on them, but what it takes to be a dad. Read to your children. Anybody in here ever read to, if you have children, ever read to them? Keep your promises. Anybody ever broken promises with their children? Go for walks together. Let your children help with household projects. Spend time one-on-one with each child. Man, I thought about you when I was going through this book right here, how not too long ago, you were telling me how you were teaching Clayton how to do gardening. You had to get the tomato plant out real quick before it was too late and so on and so forth. And we're doing a garden out home. And hopefully the kids will come over and help out with that too. but I would have loved to have been able to spend time with my dad, like planning stuff, like that. I mean, he took me to do other things, but to learn how to grow a garden and stuff would have been really cool, because now, I mean, it'd come in handy because I'm learning from the ground up. Spend time one-on-one with each child. I try to do that. I'm not as good as I should be with that. I actually, what I had in my mind a long time ago is that I'd take off every birthday, and me and my wife would spend time with the child whose birthday it was. We've decided to homeschool, but so my wife gets to actually spend a lot of time with the children. So the fun days are me. I'll take them out and do a fun day. Not as consistent as on your birthday we're going. It's more like their birthday comes and then I make a time and we go do something together. And that's something that's been really cool. I remember last year when I took Harper out, I got tickets to go see this Van Gogh exhibit, which was pretty neat. It was a visual Van Gogh where you didn't see the paintings themselves; they just put them on the wall. But I took Harper to go see that, and it was something unique. It was something that I'm never going to again. I don't think she'll ever go to it again either. But something that we could do together. And then after that, we went to a tea. I don't know exactly how to do that, tea shop or something like that. She got a tea, and I got a Vietnamese coffee, which was coffee with Eagle brand milk, sweetened Eagle brand milk, just dumped inside of it. And we sat there and we played chess together. So got some good memories there. And as I continue to go and want to learn, I think the hardest thing is when they do get older and they do become more independent and they don't need you. That's where I have found like my Achilles heel, because I mean, when you become independent, you become a person, you have your own ways, your own views. Hey, you want to go do this? No. Kind of have their own, they start having they want to spend their time and prioritize their time towards their goals. And, when you're left with Harper, she's off to college and she's a teenager and she likes doing stuff with her friends and she likes different things. And it's no longer the little girl that grew up with me reading to her every night. And that stopped probably when she was like 12, when she said, "Hey, Dad, I think you ought to read something to Lillian." Basically meaning, stop reading to me. I'm done. So, but the father is seen, for the confused father, the father is seen as negative or not influential. So that was kind of like where in the book it took me to the questions. And I think that just because of the questions themselves, we can kind of stop there for a minute if anybody has anything to say or add, and please feel free and we can discuss it. But every man is indelibly marked by his relationship with his dad. When you think back to your relationship with your dad, do you experience any heartache? When you think back to your relationship with your dad, do you have a sense that he neglected you? When you think back to your relationship with your dad, do you feel any deep regret? When you think back to your relationship with your dad, is there a major disappointment? When you think back to your relationship with your dad, do you find yourself still trying to earn his approval and acceptance? Kind of just leave it there and let those questions kind of resonate. See if it brings up anything that you guys would like to discuss.
I remember when I was 17 and I was working on a farm. It was my first job. I was a hired hand.
Is it Arizona?
New Mexico.
New Mexico.
I was in a small farming town, and only had a bike a mile to the farm to do my job. So it was pretty easy. The family kind of took me under their wing and really challenged me to think hard and do hard things. And they actually gave me a book called "Do Hard Things," and it was written about these two 17-year-olds whose father challenged them to do more than what a 17-year-old typically would do. And he gave them first thing they did was they had a summer where they wanted to just kind of loaf around, do nothing. And their dad gave them an intense reading list of all these really academic or good classical books. And he gave them incentives to read those books by the end of the summer. And it did cost them a little bit of money and whatnot to get them motivated, but they read all those books and they started really enjoying the books and they started devouring them. And he was, eventually the kids go and do things where we're like, goodness, that made me kind of feel embarrassed, like how little I've done
Yeah.
working on a farm. These guys went and met presidents, they traveled and did things, they organized these things, they became CEOs at like 18 years old and different things like that. I'm like, goodness, like these guys are beyond showboating, this is like ridiculous.
Mhm.
So I was like, it didn't really motivate me to work harder. If anything, it made me feel like there's no way I can compete with that.
So might as well
Um,
try.
Well, the thing that really stood out to me was how their dad, every time that they thought that they were going to be, they've learned everything they could from their dad was always one step ahead of them and always had something to challenge them further. And I kind of stood out to me, kind of going like, I kind of wish my dad would challenge me like that, because I never needed to feel like I needed to earn my dad's love I always knew that he was always delighted in me no matter what I did.
Yeah.
But I kind of set the bar pretty low. I didn't feel like I needed to jump very high to please him. So I kind of wish that my dad made it a little more challenging, not because, naturally we're all lazy, and I always felt that way, but I remember I ran track and field and cross country, and I remember one of my coaches told me, like, I was complaining, why am I always on JV? Why can't I be on the varsity team? He's like, well, you're just not good enough for the varsity team. You don't try hard enough. If you wanted to, you could try. If you tried harder, you could be on the varsity team, but you don't. So I started trying harder, and I got on the varsity team. And it just took someone to say, like, try harder, and I tried harder. So I kind of wish my dad had done that. So my biggest takeaway from that book actually was not what those two exceptionally well productive teenagers did, but what their dad was doing. And I kind of thought, like, well, I'll take notes, and maybe when I get to that stage, I can hopefully be one step ahead of my kids and challenge them. And, I might not, they didn't really spend much time with their dad, but because he challenged them in the right ways, they just took so much from their father, even though he spent actually remarkably little time with them. So it takes a lot of investment, but that's something that I'm trying to think ahead of. How am I going to stay ahead of my kids? But you also have to know where your kids are and what they're capable of at each milestone.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's hard too, like, as far as like the older they get, because there's things I'm just not interested in that they're interested in.
Yeah. Sometimes they don't want to do something, but you just got. I remember my uncle. He took me backpacking when I was in high school, and I guess I was always interested in doing something like that, but I felt a little uncomfortable at first. And my dad said, "No, go ahead and do it." And that was it was a rough camping trip. Like, my uncle was ex-military. He was in the Air Force and fought in Afghanistan. And it's like, no, we're gonna do this. And he was very regimented about the whole thing. So he got me interested in something that I never thought I was gonna be interested in, because he pushed me to do things that I thought I couldn't.
That's cool. I mean, I can relate to that because I've had several uncles that really stand out as those lights. Anybody else? Jamie, were you about to say? Well, actually, you know what? Let's let Paxton have a turn.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Jamie. What are you gonna say?
Well, two things. One, you were saying, like, the Jews have the Shema, and that's what their little kids would say. I thought of the answer for our kids if you started singing Jesus Loves Me. So if you had a whole bunch of kids, atheist kids, whatever, Muslim kids, but you started singing Jesus Loves Me, or one of the songs, they would probably be able to, even if they could like barely talk, they probably know the song. So
Yeah.
The other thing I was just thinking about just fathers and I think we all feel like we fall short, right? Or we don't, we're gonna look back and go, oh, what if I'd done that differently? What would,
I think that's a good thing too.
Yeah, well, and I guess all I want to say is, like, I've got great parents, and my mom's parents, she kind of had a hard time growing up, so sometimes we'll talk about stuff that happened and how that impacted her, and she always jokes and says, yeah, I just want to see in what ways we messed you guys up, and how it, et cetera. And, but I think to that point, though, like, no matter like how no one's perfect, and no matter like how good you are and how much you try, and some stuff you do is gonna backfire, and or just stuff you miss that you just couldn't get to. And so I guess, like, to me, that's part of like maybe being an adult is going, hey, my parents didn't get everything perfect, great, I've got to figure some of that stuff out myself.
Yep.
Stop blaming my parents, you know, and not just be a product of them. So in the same way, like, to me, I think, like, at some point we go, hey, I did my best, and God and the world and their character has got to do the rest, you know.
Absolutely.
And so, not that we, you know, use that as an excuse, saying we do everything we can, but at some point, whatever you do is not going to be enough for your kids. You know, they're going to have to do it.
Yeah.
So,
You know, and I've heard my mom, like, there'll be different things that come up, and she'll be like, "Oh, it's my fault because I did this," or, you know, and she takes full responsibility
Right,
for all of her
right.
faults. But you know,
right. It's like, no, you're a grown man.
yeah, but most of them, like, you know,
It's nothing hard you can
God
do
bless her,
with
but
it, you know.
some of those decisions we made, and one thing that I actually get to reflect on, and that's a very positive thing, is that my mom always made us a home.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, it was welcoming, it was good food, it was comfortable, and it was a place that you didn't want to leave. You know, and that was one thing that I think that, I mean, negates anything that she possibly could have missed along the way that was our fault.
So one thing that I've, just kind of looking at this, when it talks about teaching your children diligently, and when you're walking down the road
Mhm.
and lying in bed or sitting in your house. I struggle with this sometimes because I sometimes just use spiritual things for correction, and not necessarily every time or throughout the entire day. When things are going great, when they're having wonderful days at school, or, you know, they're in trouble. That's generally when I'm like, all right, here's what the Bible says, we need to correct ourselves.
Yeah.
I think it's important to just include that in our everyday conversations, where it becomes a habit, to where they're constantly thinking about, you know, the brace of what would Jesus do, where that's pops in their head every single time, not just when they're in trouble, or not just when they've messed up, but
Yeah.
when they're in good times and bad times, that they're always reflecting on what the Bible tells us to do. And like I said, I struggle with that because it seems like it's easy to do when you're correcting your child, to say, here's what the Bible and Jesus wants to do, instead of when they're, you know, they had a great day and you're like, man, it's great to hear. You know, here's another story of somebody else who had a great day
Yeah.
in the Bible, and kind of how they handled it. And I can remember growing up, my parents, you know, when that's the conversations I remember, are not the ones from correction, but from when we're just driving down the road and when we're having conversations, you know, just as my father and I were just having a conversation. Those are the things that stick with me, not necessarily just the correction part of it.
Yeah. That's cool. That's a good thought.
Guess what I was talking about last week is when Clayton was little, he'd do, it's not just spiritual, but it's 2 years to be out of the house, but you know, there was a time where he was happy to see me. Daddy, you know, always come running to you, all that. He's at that point where they don't need daddy as much except for certain things. But when he was little, he'd always try to imitate me, and say, so, you know, when I'd lead singing or whatever, you know, he actually got up and led a couple songs when he was younger, and that doesn't seem to be important to him right now. You know, I came from a family that's rooted in the Bible really good. I mean, Mom grew up a Baptist. She set out to prove she was right and Dad was wrong, or the Bible was wrong, and ended up becoming a Christian. And led a couple of her family members, and the rest of them weren't. But going back to Granny Harrington, Grandpa Harrington, he never went to church. It wasn't until he probably wasn't baptized until, can't remember the Lord's church, until, you know, maybe a little before I was a teenager, maybe. I don't know. Daddy used to hang out with Grandpa on Sundays and run from when Granny used to go to church, but, you know, I look back and all the things we had growing up on the farm or growing up in the country, it was great. Love it. That's what I enjoyed. But looking back, the faith that was given to me is the most understand. I come from a one-parent Christian, you know, my wife's not a member of the church. You know, plain as the fence post, she don't act like she's really concerned about her soul or his soul on top of that. So it just makes it even harder. So I'm fighting rebellion growing up.
Yep.
And then kind of sees her, you know, come on Sunday morning, but the rest of the time, you know. So that's kind of where I was going at. It's just he wants to reach out and do his own thing. Of course, I did the same thing.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's one thing too. Like I think about. I actually today can say that it's my faith.
yeah,
I don't have my parents' faith at all.
right.
You know, and I think that you have, even though you had, it's awesome that you had that, you know, mom and dad going to church, grandpa finally came to church, you got to see those things. That's awesome. But you think about it now, I mean, that's not why you're faithful.
No, it's
I mean,
not.
it's just those links. It's
I just
those,
look back to, you know,
yeah,
I listen to people, you know, I listen to people talk, and I'm gonna say, quote, air quotes, educated people, you know, think that they got all the answers, that, you know, these MIT doctor's degree, all these people here, you know, scripture talks about God's, you know, Colossians, or 1 Corinthians 1:18, the message of the cross is foolishness to those that are perishing, but
Yeah.
to us who are being saved is the power of God.
and that's one thing too. Like knowledge builds up, and love. Or actually
I
knowledge
can't do no
exalts
mathematical
or whatever.
equations that Manasseh can do all that.
No.
But I laugh and I think, you know, I thought, you know what? I'm glad, even though I'm kind of simple-minded, just no dumb old country boy, that I can understand the Bible where other people that are educated don't get it.
I think that's neat too.
Yep.
So like, I mean, knowledge puffs up, love builds up, and that's why we have a loving God that actually is the anchor that we're actually connected to. And one thing too, like even going on what Bob's talking about, like some of the things that he shared. So speed modeling was an idea for people who don't know what to do or don't have those links, that they actually want to become those links and be grounded in to the anchor through Christ and God. Is that basically you do a speed modeling drill. So basically all that is that you're doing research, you investigate, you ask questions, you listen, and you do it for a short period of time, and then you adapt whatever you learn into your particular situation. They start talking about Puritans because speed modeling, we can speed model people who've already done it before. It's already been documented. We have the Bible through all the lineage, through the prophets, God's chosen people to Christ, to Paul, spread it to the Gentiles. But the Puritans, 1620 to 1640, they're part of the Great Migration. They're people of the Bible. So they actually believe thy word is a lamp unto my feet, a light unto my path. Christian fathers were in each home. 6 days a week, the primary place of religious reflection and prayer was the household. The father was to play role of minister, leading Bible readings and doctrinal explanations, which I think that, Bob, just some of the stuff you said, that is what you're doing. And this is a time period that it actually worked better than now. Because it said that, the children were to show at all times honor and respect to their fathers. And the fathers were supposed to treat everybody with respect and dignity too. And loving men, actually were in the home. Men expected to be the fathers. Large father presence in the lives of children during the Puritan age. High level of devotion to children. Fathering was an extension of the day-to-day activities of the home because the home was an economic production unit. We see a lot of people that actually they're homesteading. So a lot of people are going back to these same roots and actually doing this, being part of the life. But the Puritan man's sense of identity was inseparable from his family and community obligations. Now, give me just a minute and I'll wrap it up. I want to point out, that's the Puritan age that we kind of dealt with in our country. We'll take a listen to after the Industrial Revolution. 1830s, women become responsible for children's morality and Christian teaching. I think about the prophet Deborah and Barak, if you haven't read that story. In Judges 4 through 10, Barak is the head of God's army. Deborah's a prophetess, gives a message from God, go fight these people. He says, I'll do it, but you have to come with me. And because of that lack of faith in God being able to lead him, Deborah tells him, okay, I'll come, but because of what you just did, the victory of this battle is going to be given to a woman. And 1830s, Industrial Revolution, men start working more. Fathers are physically gone from the home. They bought into the lie that women should have the moral and spiritual responsibility of the home, so that disconnected fathers spiritually. My dad told me one time when I was talking to him, he said, well, there was one time we were talking about going to church. He said, well, I remember back when the guys did go to church. And I immediately, because I read the Bible and I've been studying the Bible, you know, this is my dad, and I was actually able to recall Deborah and Barak. Well, ever heard the story of Deborah and Barak? He's like, no. I said, well, it's Judges, and this is what happened. You know, and it's true. I mean, if you're not going to be there, if you're not going to do your part, then God's going to use his people to be there, those lights. And your children are going to make the choice to either listen or not, but it's much better if we're there. So fathers got disconnected emotionally from their children when they didn't fill the emotional tanks of their sons and daughters because they were busy working and not being there. So I think that providing for our family is very important, because we do know that the New Testament says that if you don't provide for your families, even the ones of your household, you're worse than an infidel. So providing is necessary, but being active in your family and connected to your kids, spending time even though you don't want to a lot of times, it's necessary. So just in conclusion, a couple books that I read, there's a couple quotes that I wrote down. In the book, A Difference a Daddy Makes, said, we are willing to stake our own salvation on his word because he has proven to us in our own lives that he is able to bring order to our chaos. It said, we provide as healthy an atmosphere as possible, living what we preach and sending a clear, uncompromised, and consistent message. And it says, if the Father doesn't establish order, he's inviting chaos. So, other book I read, this one, I mean, it had like really good stuff about being blameless, which basically is just making sure that whatever you're guilty of, you make it right. You don't have to be perfect, but you actually have to acknowledge those wrongs and make it right. And that's something that we need to be doing in the home too. But the good example is the Puritans, as far as like having the Bible in the home, dad actually leading his home and actually doing what's necessary in order to fulfill that commitment to his own link, so our children actually will also be those links. And sorry for keeping a little bit extra. Thank you.